Today is October the 29th, 1999. We're in Covington, Kentucky at the 12th Armored Division reunion. My name is Charla Henson, and I'm interviewing George G. Moss. Thanks for coming today. Getting it in time. First of all, give me your full name and where you're from and parents and where they're from.
My name is George Gilbert Moss. I am now from Springfield, Illinois. I was born in Jacksonville, Illinois in Morgan County. My father's full name was Ralph Roy Moss, and my mother's full name was Nelia Eugenia White. And they are all ancestors of this nation's beginning. They have, Dad's family has a Virginia, Jamestown originality, and Mother's is Cape Cod up in Massachusetts. They first landed there in 1636, and Dad's family in 1707 in Virginia.
How many children, how many brothers and sisters do you
I have 5 sisters and 3 brothers, and 1 brother is dead. All the rest of us are still living, and we go in an age group from 69 to 89.
Okay, tell me about the years before you got into the Army, and then what led you into your Army career.
Well, of course, I was born, in a small town, and then went into a farm community, farm life, worked on a farm, and such as that, and into high school. I was one of those smart alecks that just walked in the front door and out the back. Actually, I just had the 3 months, and I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed of what I've attained in the way of, information and stuff. And then, of course, into the service. My mother, I had an older brother that was already in the service in World War II, and my mother didn't think that I should go, and she got a petition of the neighbors to sign to keep me out of the service to stay on the farm, to help these younger brothers and sisters. And at that time, there was 2 younger sisters and 2 younger brothers that were still in school. Anyway,
tell me what year you were born and where you are in the pecking order of these children.
I was born in 1921, and I'm in the pecking order right in the middle. There's 4 older and 4 younger now. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Then how did you get into that? What did you do with your mother's petition?
I left home. I left home and went to work in the city of Springfield, and met my obligations with the draft. I was working at the munitions factory at the time. It was a brand new factory. I was working in the building of it, construction of it. And of course, they didn't have it finished when I was called for the draft in October of '42. Yeah.
Where did you go in for your basic training? Oh no, first of all, what was your mother's reaction? How did you work this out in family?
Mother never did like for me to be in the service at all. She never liked for any of us to be in the service, really, If you understand, with 9 of us, there were 7 of us that were in the service at some time of life. Now, the 2 younger brothers, they were in the Korean action. All the rest, I had the 2 younger sisters' husbands were in World War II, and then the older ones, there was one of them that had a husband in World War II. Yeah. So there was 7 actually of the family. It was in war effort of this nation. Yes.
Okay. Draft. Where did you go to train?
I went to Camp Campbell. I went, from the agency where we went for the examinations and everything, and my heart wouldn't allow me to go into the Air Force. At that time, we needed a lot of pilots and bombardiers and navigators, and I was one of them that they had chosen because of my examinations, IQ and such. They had chosen me, to go into the Air Force, but my heart had a murmur and was disallowed, and so they put me in the tanks. Went down to Scott Air Base from Peoria, Rodeo traction system, electric train, and then from there, there's about 1,500 from Illinois, went to Camp Campbell, Kentucky. We split up there into different trucks, and went to different units. And I was one that went to G44. the 44th Armored Regiment.
Explain to me the makeup of your regiment.
The regiment?
Mm-hmm. That regiment.
The regiment was made up in battalions, and then the battalions were made up into companies. See? Now then, we was in the 3rd Battalion of the 44th Armored Regiment. The companies went from A on up through the L, in the regiment. Like I was in the G Company of the 44th Armored Regiment. See, although I was in the 3rd Battalion of the 44th Armored Regiment also. See? And then when after maneuver, well, that's a little later on. That's a little farther on.
Tell me about your first experience in that tank. What it was like to...
Well, the first tanks were of the Wright air-cooled engine. It had 9-cylinder motors, 9-cylinder motor, and it was on a rotor basis. And the tank had a 75 millimeter cannon on what we call the right sponson, or you would know as the right front fender of a vehicle, and we call it the right sponson. And also we had a 37 millimeter cannon in the turret, and we also had a couple of 30 caliber machine guns in the placement of the tank. We didn't have the 50 caliber machine gun yet on the turret, yet. And we had so much trouble with the air-cooled engine in the what they call the hydrostatic locks. And the hydrostatic lock was, let's see, I'll get some drink. The hydrostatic lock was caused by the cylinder stopping at the lower part of the motor, and it wouldn't turn over, and you'd have to get this great long crank to turn it off of that deadlock in order for it to start. Now that was the first motors that we had in it, and then the next one we got was the diesels. They tried that same tank with a diesel motor, and of course it didn't work because it wouldn't always start properly. You had to have what we called a little Joe on the side in order to start the big motor. We could start the little 2-cylinder motor, get it turning over to start the diesel engine on the big tank. See? And that wasn't very good, in Africa. And they found out.
So tell me the placement of the men inside this tank. And what was the name of the tanks? Was it the...
Well, we had, M4A1 was that Wright air-cooled, and then the M4A2 was a diesel, and then they had the M4A3, see, and it became the Ford. But we had another one in there, was a Chrysler air-cooled motor, and it had 30 cylinders. It had 5 6-cylinder banks on it. There would be one up at the top and 2 at the, say 10 and 2, and then 2 down here at 8 and 4, but there was none ever at the bottom where you could get that hydrostatic lock, But we found out too, that we couldn't handle in water. We couldn't go in any depth of water with that, see. But that they changed it then from an M4A4, see, the Chrysler. But then they moved back to the M4A3 for the Ford. See, in order to accommodate the large engine of the Chrysler, they had to make the tank a little bit longer, about 10 inches in length longer, and it makes a big difference in the overall operations and everything. Yeah. I mean, you're talking tank stuff to George, But,
yeah. Okay, so you went going in the turret. Tell me about positions of seating and maybe space-wise.
Well, the tank commander, of which I ended up as being for a long period of time, really. I don't know exactly how many months it was, or a year, year and a half or so. But anyway, the tank commander had a little 9-inch seat that had a locking mechanism. When you lift it up, it would lock. And of course, then you had to release that for you stand up. And to the right, just immediate right, sitting down, was the gunner. And he sat there and he had control of the cannon and a machine gun. And then the loader was also just to the left of him, where he would reach down to the bottom of the tank and get the cannons to lift and put into the breech of the cannon to be fired. You know, that was the 75 and the 76 cannon job. And then, of course, you had a driver down in the left front, and then the assistant driver in the right front. Now, there was a machine gun. What you'll hear a lot of the men refer to it as a bow gunner or the bog, you know, and his actual position was assistant driver. And he had a machine gun, a 30 caliber machine gun right there for him to fire, you know, just through the use of the periscope, where he watched to see things that the driver wouldn't see, because the driver was watching the mobility of the tank itself, and you use the assistant driver to spot any enemy or anything, any action, movement or anything out in front. So you had to have somebody that had terrific eyesight for that.
Being a tanker, was it what you expected, or what was your expectations as you went into Campbell? And
Well, you know, it all relied upon the cadre that we moved into. You know, all of the cadre of ours came out of the 80th Armored Regiment, out of the 4th Armored Division. You know, and we just got some good cream of the crop for instructors in that cadre, and the entire division itself owes everything to that original cadre that we had at Camp Campbell, because those were the original instructors for us, and I had the greatest admiration for most of them. I'd say 90% of them were terrific Americans that wanted to do this, and impressed upon us. We want to win the war, get it over with, so we can get home to our families. So many of those were already married. So many of the cadres were already married. A lot of them had children, and a lot of the draftees had children too. Yeah.
you were single when you went.
Yes.
Yes.
I couldn't have married anyone. I couldn't.
Because you were going over?
Please.
You wouldn't have married because of where you were going?
Yeah, and maybe in tanks, in the service I was in, and not coming back. Yeah. I made my insurance, you know, the life insurance, I made it out to a younger brother to try and help him get a college education in case of my death. Yeah. Damn near paid it off. They damn near paid it off. Yeah. Yeah, you know, a little later, Chris's can tell you. Chris's laid right there close to me when I was bleeding like a stuck hog. Johnny Chris's, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of them, you know. I can tell you a lot of them should have got the Silver Star. The only reason why they didn't is because he wasn't an officer. I just make it plain, blunt, you know, facts.
Okay, tell me some of the things that stand out in your mind about Camp Campbell before we get you on over to Barkley.
Red clay, red mud clay, you know. And of course, you know, there wasn't too much pavement there and that, and we had the old tanks, you know. And I can recall, so one of the things, like I mentioned about the cadre, and of course this has something to do with the officers too, you know. But one of the things in the Camp Campbell there at the beginning was, if we didn't fall out at 6 o'clock for a roll call, we had to double time around the regiment, you know, the area of the regiment. Now then, what did that do? That let all the rest of the regiment know that your company was slacking. You wasn't doing right. You wasn't doing the proper thing. And it made them want to dig at you and you know, and all that. Now, we didn't realize that other companies did not have that same policy. You know, it was our company that had that policy. By God, we're going to teach you, and you're going to have discipline with it. And that was it, see? And that was, like I said earlier, those were the things that made that division what it was, really. You just boil right back down to that education of it. You know? Right on, yeah.
When you talk about your training, of course, the practice of dealing with the tank and the guns and stuff. Was there a lot of marching and what we kind of think would be normal Army training?
Well, of course we did that. Now, you know, they had a rule there early, Army Ground Forces, that every month that we had to make a 25-mile march and put it on our records that we had accomplished such a thing. Every individual, you know. Yeah, that was just a part of that disciplinary training, you know. Yeah. Oh. So many things, though. I come from a farm background. I knew how to handle the tractors. I was put in as an instructor of driving right away. You know, I started teaching others how to drive. You know, right away the cadre found out that I could do okay with it, and then I was put in to teach the others how to drive the tanks, the half tracks, you know, everything, you know.
So you were a private, but you were an instructor?
I was a private, yes. I was a private. Yeah. And they had a system, you know, where they would award, things, you know, and give a man, say, an acting corporal, kind of make him in charge a little bit, and where others had to listen to him and all that. And, you know, but I never did get that, see, you know, and I always raised hell about the ones that they did make, you know, these acting corporals. And to this day, there's some of the men in that unit, and I thought sure it'd be a couple of them here today that still refer to me as an acting corporal from way back in 1942. You know what I tell him? He's just lucky he's alive, that's all.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me about the Tennessee maneuvers.
Well, prior to the Tennessee maneuvers, now we had a operation for the division. This is where we got the name. We had a camp where we was training, you know, and like the artillery was learning long distance firing, you know, and such as that. And the tanks had long distance firing, and we didn't have any of the close in firing as yet with the tanks. We were still going into artillery firing with the tanks, you know. And they come up with an idea, you know, that we ought to have a nickname for the division. And so there was a contest at this camp out there of how would we name it that, and they come up with a Hellcat camp, and they come up with a name then, Hellcat for the division. And that was in early 1943, I'm going to say along about April 1943, that came about. Now then, prior to the April 43, we had a hell of a big loss of men that had to go to Africa to fill in replacements for the 1st and Armored Division, 1st and 2nd Armored. In fact, it got so bad with Eisenhower and Patton, you know, over in and Bradley over in Africa. It got so bad with them over there that they finally done away with what we knew as Old Ironsides of 1st Armored and just made the 1 Armored Division for combat, and that was the 2nd, you know. We had to, we come up with the Old Ironsides for the 1st, and then we come up with Hell on Wheels, come up with all kinds. And there was some divisions that refused to accept a nickname for them, you know.
Were there other names that were kind of thrown around? Do you remember any? Somebody asked me that. What were the other names besides Hellcat that came up?
Oh no! Wait a minute! You're talking about within battalions and regiments.
Well,
Armor Raiders. See, the 44th Regiment was the Armor Raiders. See, Armor Raiders, ARMORAIDERS, Armor Raiders. That was our nickname before we were Hellcats. See, I mean, this is something that the officers and the cadre decided on in the early part, I'm going to say of October, November, and we put out a newspaper, Armor Raider News, before we put out the Hellcat News. See, and we specified different ones to be reporters for each company and such as that. You see, I can remember in my company, G Company then, before we come into the 714th, but in G Company, the reporter for the Armor Raider News was Rip Rocky Hodson from Salisbury, North Carolina. And of course, he don't like the name of Rip Rocky.
He just likes to be called Rocky. You know, and he's about 82 now. Yeah, but anyway, he was our first reporter in the old Armor Raider News. There's others I can, you know, name off, and that, you know, some of the guys were platoon sergeants, and you know, some of them were first sergeants and that. But they made it definite that it would remain within the scope of enlisted men. We wouldn't have any officers that was going to overlord any of this BS with us. As men were going to handle it. Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. You know, that was the head of it, of the Armor Raider News. You know, the editor, the first editor. He was from Indiana. I can't even think of his name now. You know, but I mean, he was a friend of mine. He was a first sergeant. He was a first sergeant in another company. See? Yeah. Yeah. Seems to me like each company, you know, which became B Company in the 714th. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, I can talk and talk and talk about, you know. I mean, I really can.
That's why we needed to interview you.
I just can tell you about how with the first Chrysler we had, you know, and we go out on little problems out in the field and that, you know, and they had a ford, they had a creek that with heavy rains and that, it would get quite deep. And this is where we found out about, you know, that this tank couldn't run through the water any distance, you know, like crossing a creek or a river or a canal. You know, it would choke down and flood out. Yeah. And I can tell you about, it seems like a G Company of the 44th, and I don't know where it was or what officers were responsible, but it seems like they were guinea pigs for a lot of things. And of course, one of the things that they were guinea pigs for was to take the tarp covering of the tank, you know, this great big tarp, and try and float a Jeep across water. And I just turned that story in. It's in that box that. But anyway, I can tell you about the three men, you know, and this flood came along, you know, and that's where they got to test this tarp floating the Jeep across. They didn't float across. The damn thing got in the water there and floated them on down the way. They caught a branch hanging over it. And that's through the same day that the tank flooded out that's the reason why they had to try and float that thing across. And it was G Company. Another thing they did, maybe Earl Norris went into this, I don't know. No, Earl wasn't with us. Earl wasn't with us at the time. We took a tank, you know, an M4 medium tank, and we run it over a Royal, I always say a Royal Grandee, you know, over a ravine, 40 feet deep, you know, that tank. Man with the name of Mullet, Henry Mullet, was picked as a man to drive it over this thing. And it went over. Now, we all knew, you know, what was happening and all this stuff, see. Well, Henry, good friend of mine, he's dead now, he died in 57. But he rolled that tank over that ravine there, and it landed on the turret, you know. And then Mullet crawled out the escape hatch, and then this is when the first T2 record that the Army had made, you know, General Motors. First T2 record was used, you know, to see we run out over our purpose, and it was going to pull that tank out of there, and it couldn't do it. I mean, I might be getting out of earshot or eyeshot here, I don't know, because I do love this kind of stuff. And we had to, you know, use something else in order to pull that tank out of there. And what we used? 3 tanks with the cables, you know, off of a company of tanks. 5 tanks, you know, and fastened them together around trees and pull that something up like that. Yeah. They found out they had to do something else with that T2 record, you know, for the 134. John McNall probably said something about it. I don't know. I don't know if he'd say something about that or not, because he was most in gas supply, but he couldn't get into the mechanic. Gosh, so many of them guys are, you know, friends of mine, you know, through the years, you know. Yeah. And I can mention their names, and if they see it on the tape and everything, why that son of a buck? you know. I don't care, you know.
So they basically were using y'all as guinea pigs, trying to figure out what equipment needs, what changes.
Starting off, yeah.
Yeah, what
Yeah.
had to be done to get it okay, to get it,
Yeah, a lot
get
of
it
it,
over.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, of course, now then that was the Hellcat camp that you asked about. And you want to get into maneuvers. And maneuvers, of course, was split up. This is where we were split up into combat groups in maneuvers. Now then, we still had regiments. We wasn't into the battalions, you know. We was still, you know, G Company, the 44th, you know. And they had the different times of the week for problems. Sometimes your unit would be on a problem, say, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Other times you might be on a problem Thursday, Friday, Saturday. You know, and always, you know, you had the airborne had to figure in with some of it too on this maneuvers, and that, and also the planes would actually drop flour bags on us, you know, and whenever we got hit, you know, with one of them flour bags, why, we was dead right there. You stopped right there, and you had to live off the land, you know, until that problem was over. If that's John, tell him to come in. No? Anyway, that was a part of the maneuvers thing, see? You know, and then, you know, you always slept in tents, and you always dug foxholes and all that kind of stuff.
So y'all did like y'all were exactly in battle.
Yes, yeah. In fact, our units used live ammunition, except for cannons. We used live machine gun ammunition against each other's tanks. You know, to give us a feel of the actual combat in that thing. Now we didn't use the cannons in that, you know, but we did use the cannons in a lot of things. A lot of firing. We used direct fire and indirect fire, and you know, oh my God, I was one of the lucky ones that was just. I wasn't any smarter than anybody else, but I could just do these things. I don't know whether the good Lord, you know, give me the ability or what. I don't know. Right away, you know, in the Hellcat camp, I could line up 5 of them tanks on the same target, you know, and hit it. You know, it was just I was just able to walk off or pace off, you know, and have them set their cannons, you know, by certain mils and degrees and that. I don't know what it was really. It was just a natural ability that, and I could hit them targets, you know. General Brewer, and it's in the Hellcat book, you know, the first picture in the Hellcat book is of General Brewer talking to somebody on the back of a tank, and he's talking to me, you know, and he's talking to me because I can hit them targets. You know, I can give directions to a gunner, and the general asked for permission, you know, to give directions to the gunner. The gunner's name was Harold Meyer, and he's from Elkhart, Indiana. That's where he's from. And an older man. He was probably 12 years older than me. And he come into my company a little later. But it was still G44. And General Brewer would give a fire order to Meyer, and he'd miss the target. And he couldn't figure it out, and he'd try another, and he missed the target. And he'd ask me if I could correct that. So I'd tell Harold, go back to the first target, you know, and let's get so many mils up, you know, and let's move a little bit mils to the left, you know, and he'd hit the thing like that. And the General Brewer, he couldn't understand that darn thing, and the man, he was so, I don't know what it was, but he was, I guess, thrilled, really. General Brewer, he sent that picture home to my mother. He sent it to my hometown paper and had it published in my hometown paper, and sent a copy of it to me at the camp, you know, at Camp Campbell. Yeah, he couldn't understand how he'd missed them targets, because he is an old West Point field artillery man, you know. He was the one that helped to set up these here armored things with old Patton and Ike and them, you know. Oh, there's so many things that I don't know. Here, one thing now. Eisenhower and Patton were both commanders of tank battalions, 19, 20, 21, 22. Different tank, but 321 and 322 is the number of the battalions. And I had the good fortune to meet the driver of Eisenhower's tank, you know, in later life, you know, where he's living right there in my hometown. You know, Robertson, Willie Robertson, and I talked to him, went and visited him a lot of times, talk about this here. And I've got some of them books in this here box of the old World War One tank outfits, you know, that, you know, you can study back on the originality of a lot of this stuff that's in there. I bothered to do all that stuff. I don't know why. This is my home. This is my native land. You know. You're gonna get. You know. You're gonna take my blood. You know. You're not gonna walk over me. I'm gonna tell you something. I want you to notice how many POWs there ever were in the 714 Tank Battalion. Huh? You have any idea?
I don't.
One POW in our battalion, because of what I told you earlier about that cadre. You know, the initial instructions. You know, it's so important. You know.
So basically, they just gave y'all a really good basis that it became instinct.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, a lot of it did. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh, almighty, yes. I can tell you also some of the good stories, but we're still into, you know, out of Hellcat Camp maneuvers, you know, and now the 714th. See, this was at the time, 1943, when they decided that they'd go from what we knew as square divisions, which was regiments, you know, 4 regiments make a division. We went from the square divisions to the triangular divisions, where we would make battalions, 3 battalions, like 3 battalions of artillery, 3 battalions of tanks, 3 battalions of infantry, and then all the support groups, you know, like the 119th, you know, the 92nd, the 82nd, you know, and all those others, see? Then they make all those battalions, support groups, out of divisional headquarters, but you still have the triangular division of the 3 infantry battalions, and the 3 tank battalions, and the 3 artillery battalions. And then they further made it so they would break it down into Combat Command A, Combat Command B, and Combat Command R. Combat Command R was always reserve.
Did that change? Did it, explain to me about the difference between that and the reserve. Did you become reserve at different times?
Yes.
Okay, so you kind of rotated
Yes.
in and out?
Yes.
Okay, give us a little more explanation of that.
Well, it was according to the higher echelon, you know, the Army headquarters, the Army Corps headquarters, you know, and the division headquarters, or the commanding general of the division. You know, they would make those divisions of what battalions would be put in reserve and which ones weren't, see? Yeah, now there would be times when they couldn't really stick to that. You know, they could, and I will not say that they always had 3, you know, up. Always they had a reserve, see? Always we had a reserve. You know, protecting in back, see?
Okay,
Yeah.
the reserve were so if things got too bad up at the front, these men were in reserve to come up and help relieve and to help
Yes.
get you out of the problem.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was basically what it is.
Explain to us about the Corps,
Well, the Corps,
like the 23rd Corps,
21st
21st Corps.
21st Corps and the 6th Corps, and these were groups of divisions, you know, within an army, and they would be an overlapping of a corps of maybe 2 armies. In other words, the 6th Corps might be a part of the 3rd Army and the 7th Army. All right, and also the 21st Corps might be a part of the French Army, you know, and the Seventh Army, and of the parts that we were in, you know. Now then, you have to understand in asking me questions now, I got hit in January at Hurleshine, and so therefore I didn't get in on, like the guy said, I missed all the good stuff. That's what
Yeah, the fun part going down the road where it was easy.
they like to tell me that. They like to rat me about that. You know, I missed all the fun part of it. Yeah. And they, you know, once in a while I'm going to use language, you know, that's not befitting to this thing, and of course you can scratch it, you know. You know, so one time we was at a reunion, you know, one of the guys says, "Boss, whatever happened to that tank that was following me when the bridge broke with me?" Well, you mean you don't know who in the devil was in back of you in your platoon? You know, Bill Bowes who was, you know, and the bridge just broke down and the tank just fell right through it, right down into the creek, see? Well, the next man was Griffin. Pat Griffin was the driver of the next tank, and by gosh, he seen him fall down. He just pulled off the road and pulled down the hill, crossed the creek, went up the other side, and just kept going, left Bill sitting there. Yeah, I'm going to say 20 years later, Bill asked me, who in the hell else is following me? What happened to him? How come he didn't find land right on top of me, you know? Yeah. Oh, boy. And that's, you know, that's part of it. Okay, now then, Fort Jackson. We went to the Triangular Division, and they had to split the 44th into the 714th and the 44th. All right? The 43rd was split into the 23rd and the 779th. Okay? So you had the battalions, you know, of the 714th Tank Battalion, the 43rd Tank Battalion, the 23rd Tank Battalion. But you also had these two others, you know, that had to be done with. The 44th, something had to be done with it, you know, and the 779th come out of the 23rd, out of the 43rd. The 779th come out of the 43rd, and all the time that I was a secretary, I could only locate 4 of those men to be members of the organization, and I got that in that little box there too, of the membership that I think was in 80 and 81, and those 4 members' names show up in there. I believe one of them lived in Croydon, Indiana, you know, just north side of the Ohio River. But anyway, they split those up like that. Now then, I do not know what happened to the 779th. 714th, of which I was a part of, went to South Carolina, went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And we were under orders at that time that we was going to go to Italy. We was going to go overseas into Italy. And we was given a colonel, a battalion commander, at the end of, you won't hear this hardly any place. The battalion commander that we were given in Tennessee to move us to South Carolina was James Sneed, Colonel James Sneed. West Point man, come out of engineering school. He was a combat engineer.
S-N-E-E-D?
S-N-E-E.
Oh, Sneed.
James Sneed. And right now he lives in Melbourne, Florida. You know, I've talked to him, and he don't want to do anything at all with 714 or nothing. He don't want nothing to do with it. Right? We insulted him highly. We just absolutely, the battalion just absolutely insulted him. Something terrible. It was a good man. I can recall him, and he won't like for me to say this, but I'm going to say it because it's the truth. He come to our day room there at Fort Jackson, A Company, 714th then, talked to us, you know, about his assignment and that, having to leave us, and actually cried with us in the day room. Big man, about 6'3" or 4. To me, he was a terrific man, Jim Sneed. And of course, none of the guys ever wanted to remember him. Headquarters company of the 714th, the men of headquarters company have to know about Jim Sneed, because he was their commanding officer when we left Tennessee and went to Fort Jackson. Now, there's something else. While we're loading up the tanks on the flat cars at Carthage Junction, Tennessee, for the 714th to make the trip down to Columbia, down to Fort Jackson. While we're there, we had a visitor. Young Army guy. He'd volunteered, but he was home on leave. Al Gore. Al Gore come and talked to us there, a U.S. Congressman from Tennessee, the father of this man. The father of this man, yeah. Actually, and he was elected, the U.S. Congress and then the Senate. The original Al Gore. But anyway, he was there at Carthage Junction, Tennessee, when we were loading the tanks and the vehicles, half-tracks, and that on the flat cars to go by rail. Now, those things that guys don't want to talk about and remember too much.
What is the, why is it with Mr.
Sneak.
Sneak? What was the problem there? Was it just that they just don't want to remember him, or did something happen?
No, something happened down there at Columbia, South Carolina, within the battalion. It was way beyond his control, but he's the one that had to suffer with him. And we did. We had to suffer. You see, we got in a big fight down there. I don't know if he's listening or not, but we got in a big fight down in Columbia, South Carolina. And we got into a fight with a battalion of the 101st Airborne. Now, we'd been on maneuvers with the 101st Airborne, and the tanks and the airborne, or tanks and aircraft, the Air Force, we didn't ever mix or mingle in the towns and cities and that. There was always something there between us, that you're not any better than we are, or whatever, And anyway, we got in a big fight in downtown Columbia, South Carolina, and my battalion was restricted to Fort Jackson for 30 days, and we had to pull post guard. We had to pull post guard of the entire post for that 30 days, and these guys don't want to talk about it, don't want to remember that, and I don't know why, because it was so important to us as was. We was to go overseas. When we pulled this big boo-boo, we wasn't ready. Now, in Fort Jackson, we were firing at moving targets. That was what it was. It was a big tank base, away wide open spaces with sand and that. And we was firing at moving targets. In other words, they'd have towed targets, the size of tanks, the size of half-tracks, the size of jeeps, and they'd be towing them out, out across the field there, and we'd have to fire at them. And then also we had the thing of firing from moving tanks. We had, and that was one of my mistakes there, was with hand grenades. Throwing at a target in a tree. I wanted to see if I hit it, and a piece of shrapnel hit, a piece of that hand grenade hit my helmet. See? Keep your goddamn head down, you fool. But that's what we did there at Jackson. We got training for moving tanks, targets, and moving targets, And what happened? We goofed up with the fight in downtown Columbia, and they held us off of the combat movement to Italy, And what happened? They had to have the unit over in the Pacific, and they took the 44th and moved them to the Pacific and put the 714th at Camp Barkley in their place.
Never heard it.
We moved right back into the division, and I will tell you that the division has never accepted that battalion back in wholeheartedly.
44th?
No, 714th. The division has never really accepted it in wholeheartedly. I know, the animosity within these units and that, the men and everything. There's so many of them, Oh, good gosh, there's so many of them that are gone that, boy, oh boy, I had such, camaraderie with, and also competition with, you know, other units, you know. Oh, yeah. Anyway, now that there, you never heard that part of it about the 714th and the 44th on the movement of them to the Pacific. I don't know if you ever got anything out of the 44th of the heroism that they got and all the big names that they got. I don't know if you got any of that. I don't know if you got any of them to give an interview like this. You know, one, who was it?
Oh, it's the guy who's but he wasn't in action. He was in headquarters and was always back behind. And
Yeah, yeah. See, I become such good friends with those men too. See,
he was a clerk. He was a clerk.
Yeah, yeah, and I went to their reunions and that for many years, you know, and they all liked me. They all, you know, I helped them, you know, get started and having their battalion reunions and all that stuff. But anyway, it would be good to talk to one of them because why? They were the ones that liberated the Santo Tomas prison, you know, and they were awarded the distinction of liberating Manila. It was the unit that was allowed to march through Manila. What else? They were allowed the privilege of the liberation of Tokyo. They also were in that band on the liberation of Tokyo. That was the 44th. And that's that 44th, like I told you, comes out of that cadre from out of Camp Campbell. You know, to me, it's just such a pride feeling that I could be a part of these units and retain such deep respect of them, you know. See, I got knocked out of a tank over there at Herlisheim. Good guys almighty, and they don't want to accept the fact that the 714th was the initial assault on Herlisheim. The division doesn't wish to do that. You know, I can tell them who in the heck was there. God dang it, I was on the initial reconnaissance of it, you know, January 6th.
Tell me about this. See, are you getting ahead of yourself, or are you going to come back and tell me later about
What
this?
is it?
About Herlisheim and about the reconnaissance?
I mean, whatever you want me to talk to you about. You want me to go about the other first? About
It
the
doesn't
Fort
matter.
Jackson? Fort Jackson?
Yeah, let's finish Fort Jackson then.
Fort Jackson? Well, they had issued us guns. We had been issued on 45s, you know, and everything. And they'd already made arrangements for us to move out and another unit to move into the barracks where we went. They give us a 30-day post guard. You know, everybody had to heck fire. I was a platoon sergeant and had to pull sergeant of the guard on that gosh darn thing for 30 days. You know, I'm telling you, 714. It was really something else. See.
So it's really a black mark on the...
Yes, on the battalion. On the battalion. But the one that suffered was the commander, Jim Sneed. Jim Sneed was the one that got hurt, see? The rest of us got insulted by moving back with the division. They cut the turkey strings on us good. But you know, what they made us do there at Fort Jackson was, we had to pitch tents, or pup tents outside of the barracks where we'd been living, you know, because they'd already made arrangements for another unit to come in, and we had to live in the goddamn tents outside the barracks. And they ain't many of the guys want to admit that and say anything about it, because it was a part of the insult, you know, that come through all of it, you know. I mean, I'm not ashamed. I mean, I was a part of it. I'm mixed in the fight too, you know. I had to send, well, not just me, other guys had to pick a man out, you know, certain time of the week to send down to the PX. The guys in the platoon, you know, they make a list of what they want, you know. I picked out a guy named Ford, you know, from Pennsylvania to, not Pennsylvania, Michigan, from Flint, Michigan. I picked him out to make the trip down to the PX, you know, 8 o'clock Tuesday evening. That was the assigned time for our platoon to get over, you know, at the PX now. Now, see, this is stuff that these guys don't want to ever think about and don't talk about or nothing. Yeah, but it's a fact. And what happens with Ford? You know, when Bob Ford, when he's down there at the PX, here comes some of the guys from the 101st that we'd had the big fight with, and gosh, they pick a fight with Ford, and then they had their weapons, and the gun went through the, the shot went through the ceiling, and and they pull in Ford, and the 101st too, But that was another, and here we are on restriction.
Did the 101st ever have to pay for that?
Well, I don't know. Well, I wouldn't think the 101st did. I would think the Army did, not the 101st. There was 6 bars, taverns in downtown Columbia that we tore up, and in downtown Columbia there, you could only buy beer or wine. You couldn't get any whiskey or hard liquor or anything. You had to go to a private club to get it. And close by was Newberry, South Carolina, which was a location of the Women's College. And so this added a little fuel to the fire.
Y'all were just crazy, huh? So when did you leave Fort Jackson and head to Texas?
It had to be March. Yeah, it had to be March. It took a couple of months, 60 days or so to get paperwork, everything all made up, and everybody, and shots for everybody and everything. A lot of things happened with us. We had men that in the brig under guard that jumped the train in Georgia, and such things that we had different things that happened, I can tell you who's involved and everything. So many stories, personal stories that I'm involved in.
They jumped a train?
Yeah.
What's
I mean, it was barred. It had barred windows, and we had a guard at each end. And they broke the bars out of the window and jumped out in the state of Georgia when we're moving from Fort Jackson to Barclay. Yeah. I was one of 3 sergeants that had to go back to Charlotte, North Carolina, and get them. They was in the brig over there at some air base over there. Yeah, and see, I know those men's names and all that. I mean, they were friends. We was all friends together in company. And then Hodges was one of the best tank drivers there was. He's only 19. Yeah. Fox was a little older, but he wasn't very big. He was from Cincinnati here. Fox. Yeah.
So were y'all any different than any other
I couldn't tell you.
battalion?
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
I don't know. We didn't mingle with the other battalions. We did it at Campbell. We did at Campbell. Because it was a different proposition through that Hellcat camp. Yes, we did, and I got to know a lot of the guys in the other battalions, and although I was a lower ranking, tank driver, that's when I become a tank commander. Was at Camp Lucky Strike here with General Brewer there with the fire. Yeah.
Tell me about your first view of Texas as you're going into Camp Barkley. And what did you say?
Why don't you keep it? Why don't you keep it? What the hell are we doing here? They don't need us in this place. We've already been through the sand in South Carolina. The only difference was the tumbleweeds. We didn't like it. And I told you about having the test, for anti-aircraft fire, with the 50 caliber machine gun and that. Who in the hell wins that darn thing in the battalion? Me and a guy named Hagen. So we end up as instructors, aircraft instructors for the rest of them down at Camp Donna Ana, down there north of Fort Bliss, out there in the White Sands Desert. We were out there teaching them guys how to fire 20-20s and 40-40s and the 50 caliber machine gun. They had a rocket. I don't know if anybody's ever mentioned this or not. They had a rocket that was 42 inches long, and fire 450 yards, make an arch. And we had to teach guys with 50 caliber machine guns trying to hit that thing as it would fly through the sky, And girls, women, they flew the planes that towed the targets, you know, for the aircraft. You know, we'd fire 20-20s, and you know, and 40 millimeters and this, you know, at them. I say 20-20. It was 20 millimeter and 40 millimeter. It was four shells on banks, you know, and I ended up instructing on that kind of stuff. And all the guys knew I didn't know anything about the darn things. You know, I didn't know any more. I was just good at you know, writing them answers to that question on the 50. You know how to fire it and how to handle it, how much it weighed and how long was it and all that. You know, just a matter of memorizing. So, yeah. Another kid 3 years younger than me, named Hagen. He ended up with it on a whip. We got to stay at Fort Bliss, you know, in downtown El Paso, and them guys have to stay in them tar paper shacks out there in the desert. And I swear the sand would blow right through the walls. I swear it would.
So how long were you there before you went back to Barkley?
Well, we was 30 days on that there, on that anti-aircraft firing. Yeah. Let me see. The rest of the division has had that. You know, while we were in Jackson getting the tank moving targets and all that thing, they're going through this anti-aircraft thing. See, you know, I don't know where they got the idea where they was going. I guess they knew they were going to go to Europe. You know, with the 8th Air Force and 9th Air Force. You know, I guess that's what's the reason for that. You know, but we didn't have that. See, we was getting the tank targets now, you know, or moving targets and moving tanks. When we got to Barkley, that's the first thing we did. We had to get down there to Camp Donna Ana and teach guys anti-aircraft firing. See? Yeah, and I was just one of them lucky guys that was picked for that. One of the worst ones they could get, I guess. I'd go across just a little bit of a teet-a-teet here. I'd go across with me and Hagen. Hagen was 3 years younger than me. And we'd go across the bridge, walk across the bridge there at Juarez, you know, and get bottles of tequila, you know, 90 cents a quart and 10 cents on the duty. You know, had to pay 10 cents on the bridge to carry it into the United States. We get it for 90 cents a quart over in Mexico and take it out to Donna Ana there and let them guys out there in the sun and the sand and get drunker than the devil on that tequila, see. They hated to be out there in the first place, you know. Then they hated for me, of all people, you know, the old acting corporal, they hated for me to be given instructions.
So were some of them, their ranks higher than yours?
What?
Were some of their ranks higher?
Oh yes,
than yours?
yes. On the on the instructions, you know, given. Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, we had that was the dirty part of it.
Well, when you got back to Barkley, when did you get to Barkley for good before you went overseas?
Well, it was just that month training there, and we really weren't away from Barkley. So just certain units would go to Camp Donna Ana for the firing net, and the two instructors stayed there for the 30 days, you know, while we get back to Barkley, you know, every once in a while. It wasn't anything like being stationed someplace else. We just TDY for the time being for that anti-aircraft instructions, yeah. We wasn't really away from Barkley per se, you know.
Tell me the thing that stands out in your mind about Barkley, or something that happened at Barkley.
Camp Barkley. Well, of course we always had that 25-mile march. April 17th, 1944, we had to make a 25-mile march, and the temperature was 117. And we requested permission from the officers if we could have that 25-mile march start at midnight. Because the Army didn't care what time of day you had it had to be on that day, you know. And so we, you know, us non-coms, we figured it would be all right if we could just let the men just walked in the morning, midnight on, so it'd be a lot better for us, 7 hours. Oh yeah, that was okay. They agreed with it. And of course, the guys were tickled to death because they get back in, get a bite to eat, and then they're sack time the rest of the day. The Army don't work like that. It just don't work like that. See, I'm back in a little less than 7 hours, and get breakfast. As we come in, we got breakfast, and I'd hit the sack. And, hey, wake up at 12 o'clock, report for duty. Going to have exercise. Going to have 4 hours of exercise. Ain't nobody wants to go through any 4 hours of calisthenics, and what we had to do. And we would line up in each platoon would line up in a big circle. I said platoon, each company line up a big circle, and then they'd go through different calisthenics by whatever the sergeant in command was issuing. Very few times did an officer give us these things like that. We did have an officer one time, I mentioned the early part of having to run around the regimental area, for not being on time. His name was Jim Lehman, and he became the company commander of B Company over in combat. And all the guys in our company always admired him, always liked him, and he always had such a high regard and respect for all the guys in our company. Jim Lehman was well thought of by all of us, and he really liked all of us. He was one of the better. He became a captain. When I first knew him, he was the first Louis. When we first went in at Campbell, there's different things. RCO was the first Louis at the time, but then you get on to this Barclay thing. We had to, those that didn't know how to swim, or to take swimming lessons and to learn how to swim, and we had to go into Abilene at the municipal pool for that. And I got pictures of that. I'm sure that they're in the records of the school. I'm sure they are. I've had so many. You see, I don't know really why it was, but the men always thought that they could send me pictures and I'd get them in the paper, in the Hellcat News, or I would, have copies made and sort them out and everything. I would get, they would give me them little 2x3s, from overseas, and I'd get them blown up into 5x7s and give them to all of them. I have a friend that would be a photographer and could do all that stuff, and I'll forget it was. I won't charge you hell, I suppose. You'd see what the pictures were. So many of them about the tanks, and Barclay too. I know that you're very, very interested about Barclay. I don't know, did I say Abilene, did I say to you, was it about the railroad, the train that went through there? I asked one of them, if Amtrak goes through there. No. Well, you see, we used to have good kissing stations. We had 2 kissing stations. And there's the viaducts of the train. What was it? Pine and Cedar. Mm-hmm. Huh? Mm-hmm. What a memory I got for that.
Me too.
Why is that? I don't know.
You got a great
I just enjoy such, the men that I was with, became such good, close friends and everything. I had a card the other day, well, just not a card, a phone call. I'd sent her a birthday card, Her husband had died in 1973, and he was my tank driver when I got hit, see? And I'd sent her a birthday card, and she had to call me and thank me for a birthday. Well, the thing is, you see, we're down there, we left Barclay to go to Camp Shanks, and we stopped at Charlotte, North Carolina, 4 hours, and I'd asked our CO, Bob Harrington, to let Hood, let him go and see his wife at the hospital, because she's expecting their first child and that. No, I couldn't do that, Never did let me know. Never did let me know until 1973 that he had permitted Hood George to go to the hospital to see that new baby son, and Thelma had to write, call me and tell me about that again, And her son never married, lives with him yet, lives with her yet. Yeah, that's in California now. Yeah, he delivered Coca-Cola at Charlotte, North Carolina. Yeah, what a guy's name, memory. Tell you.
Okay, get us from New York City to Europe.
714?
Yes. Tell me about.
I've got an amazing story to correct a lot of BS that you've been getting.
Okay.
Okay.
Go.
All right, go cat, go. We went from Barclay, the division. There was 7 trains, went different directions. They left from Abilene, there, Camp Barclay. We went 7 different routes to get to New York, And like I said, ours come through that Charlotte there, so George Reed got to see his child. Anyway, there was one that went right through my hometown. This was some went clear west, Kansas City up into Canada, and across a lot of. There were 7 different trains, went 7 different lines to get to New York when we was going to go overseas. And some of us were in a position where we'd have the meetings and be notified of what days and times and all this, and it was up to us to keep our gosh darn mouth shut, and not let anybody know about what the heck's going on, Well, I'm in one of them in positions at that time. I had become a platoon sergeant of A Company, 3rd Platoon. We get into Camp Shanks, and of course it's all new to us. We don't know anything about going, and the CO Harrington, he comes to the platoon, he calls the platoon sergeants in and tells us that you've been notified that they can let us have passes into New York City. They would be 12-hour passes. You'd leave the post, Camp Shanks, at 6 o'clock in the morning or evening, and you had to report back 12 hours later, 6 o'clock, morning or evening, or whatever it was. And of course, not only I, but the platoon sergeants had been notified there was going to be 5 days of it, So it was possible for guys to get 60 hours, in the city, in New York City. And there was many, many of us that didn't know how much hay you could put in that building, So and it was a big thing for all of us to do this. And I'll have to say, the GI, the single GI in that, he had the ability to scatter to the winds, But I don't know if you want to hear personal stories in regards to something like this or not. I have some terrific personal stories on that. But the Camp Shanks thing, the CO, he volunteered our company for KP, for the trip over to Europe. All right? Whole company is going to be on KP. But he waits, until about the last day to inform the men, that this is what's going to happen. And then it's up to the platoon sergeants, to be assigning details on the ship. Well, we have to get on the Marine Raven, a Liberty ship. We have to get in on that 1 day early, We have to, so we can get acquainted with the ship and with the details, because we're going to have to handle all the mess hall things, all the kitchen stuff, and everything. We're going to have to handle it, And all of the men on A Company of the 714 assigned. Now, see, there was other units of the battalion, B and C, were on it also, D, But we have to assign these men, the different sections of mess hall duty. See, it was the greatest thing that happened to us, really. We got freshwater showers. We got to work with the Navy. It's so much different. We got the best food. We just, and it was a wonderful thing. Although we was all mad at Harrington for volunteering our services, it was the best thing ever. 11 days to go over, and we was in a convoy of approximately 300 ships. And we can see the big fish, the whales, we can see the flying fish and all this stuff. I tell you, security. platoon sergeant. They gave me one of them blue barracks bags with flashlights, 2 battery flashlights, and they give me the 24 battery or the 48 batteries for the 24 flashlights, 1 for each man in the platoon. Now, discounting mine because I'm going to have one anyway. But anyway, they had to be kept separate on the ship. There was no way that I was to permit those flashlight cases to get intermingled with them batteries at any time. There was never any way it could ever be. Now then, on present day lingo, it don't mean a heck of a lot. And in our day, it meant a heck of a lot. Now then, something else they gave me, and this is something the guys don't, they don't, in fact, they might tell you, Moss is full of BS. They give me 20, a gross of condoms, to be dispersed among the men. Now then, they're not to be dispersed until you get into England, And the division is scheduled to pull into Liverpool, Liverpool, England, not 714. The 714th and the Marine Raven pulled into Southampton. And we went a different route to an air base in England. We went to an air base in England that first night, and then within a day, we were moved to Tidworth Barracks, where the rest of the division started coming in, different truck routes and that, and from Liverpool and other ports up around Liverpool, They didn't all come into Liverpool, by no stretch of the imagination. The 714th, it went into Southampton, and we went by truck to an air base. The air base, I don't even know where it was or what it was. It had grass, sod, over the Quonset huts, Yeah, that's where we spent the first night there. It was dark when we got there, too, I might say, too. Yeah, they transported us by dark, That was our first night in England, Yeah. And then, of course, we got to Tidworth Barracks, and we got new equipment. Had to clean the Cosmoline off all the guns. Had to go down to the channel and fire the cannons, at moving targets. On the channel, had towed targets, ships or boats. I don't know if you got any of this stuff or not from the people.
Yes, some of it. What was your feeling as you got closer to Europe?
I got sicker than a dog. I got sick in the dog on an LSD. It was about the third one in front of us hit a mine and sank an LST. I don't know what unit it was or anything. But I just know that I seen it go. And I was sick. I was sick. And I went down in the hold. John just told me today that he went down in the hold. And I don't remember John being down there at all, but I went down in the hold with the tank, and I heard the clanking of the chains and all that stuff, and the Navy coffee and soda crackers. I lived on them darn things that 7-day trip across that channel. And we landed there, we hit the shore on the Seine River, and our unit went into Alfay, close to Alfay. I was given orders there. The first thing to do was to dig a straddle trench, and to pull up far enough so that the company could all park their tanks along the road. That was when we first got into France. That was in Alfay. Somebody else picked out a billet, for them, or a place where they could hang their hats, helmets and that. And the chateau that they got, the headquarters platoon got the first floor, first platoon got the second floor of the chateau, the headquarters got the lower floor of the chateau, and the first platoon got the upstairs of the chateau, and the second platoon got the lower floor of the barn, and the third platoon got the hayloft of the barn. And we didn't have any lights or anything. And the first time there, I used to take Julie Zucker with me and a cup of sugar. I got off of Fats Kroyak to cook. You know, I don't know if you hear these names or recognize them or anything. Anyway, William Kroyak, God bless him too. He died of a heart attack in 1966, left 6 children. But anyway, he was a mess sergeant, and I got a cup of sugar off of him, and I took Julie Zucker because he could speak German. And I'm in France, and we go around, you know, the countryside there with this cup of sugar, wanting to trade it for 2 light bulbs. Didn't know what the heck to ask for in French. You know, didn't have the slightest idea. Walked around that town, that little town of Alfay there, you know, trying to find it, and finally, it come on one of them Frenchmen's minds, you know, that we were seeking a lampoule électrique. A lampoule électrique. We couldn't possibly get it out of German or out of English, you know. And, you know, Julie and I, but a lampoule électrique. We got 2 for the cup of sugar, and put them in the bulbs in the barn, and the guys could ride home the first day they was in France. Yeah. Yep. I mean, my platoon, I didn't know about what Addison did with his, or you know, or Barnes did with his. And, you know, Barnes is down below me. You know.
Tell me about the first day of battle and leading up to, where were you and how was that? What was the feel of that?
We, you know, we had went into France from England, I want to say, short of personnel. It wasn't every tank in the company that was full. We didn't have 5 men in every tank. My tank only had 4. So the first thing we had to do, you know, when we got into France, was get a location. Well, the battalion done all this, and get a location, and then figure out replacements. What you're going to do with them, where you're going to work them. I got a man in the tank by the name of Kelly. You know, his name was Kelly from Fayette, Idaho, Walt Kelly Jr. And I had to teach him how to drive a tank first thing, because he'd have to be the assistant driver. You know, and this was around Lunaville. That's where we had bivouacked, you know, for these here replacements coming in. I got Kelly there in my tank, and that was the only one I was short in the platoon to at that time. And anyway, it was a matter of teaching him the tank. He did know something about the machine gun, but didn't know anything about the cannon. So there was no way I was going to be able to use him as a gunner until he got more acquainted with the tank crew in there. Walt Kelly. Well, that was the first one at Lunaville, and then our next stop was, and we had billets at Barley Duck, you know, and then we went into the first combat that we went in, I'm going to say December the 5th, was at the little town of Bitweiler, which the 3rd Platoon and the 56th Infantry, C Company of the 56th Infantry, was instrumental in taking that little town of Bitweiler. That was the early part of December.
So had you been shot at yet? Had you been in your tank and been shot at yet at this
At that time?
Uh-huh.
No, I mean, the platoon had.
Oh, okay.
No, well, there at Bitweiler, one of the tanks got stuck in the mud. You know, there's a little creek there just to the west of it, and the 152nd man with the communications was trying to get the wires all laid out for communications and that, and the 119th Engineers was trying to make log roads like to go across the creek. You know. But it was there where one of the guys was stuck, and this mullet that I had mentioned to you before, he was with this T2, you know, then, and in combat there, and he was there to pull his tank out when I was talking to McLaughlin, Charlie McLaughlin. He was the First Lieutenant in
headquarters platoon. You know, he was the commanding unit of headquarters platoon in the company. And he and I was talking there on the side of this tank. Now, this is the first that I got, you know. And he was trying to give more instructions, you know, and the rest of the crew of how to tow the tank backwards first to try and, you know. And there was a shell hit close there. It was a mortar shell that hit and exploded, and there was a piece of it hit the side of that tank, not the wrecker. It hit the side of the tank, you know, plopped like that and fell down in the mud, see, you know. And Charlie hit the mud. He hit the ground. I told him, well, you know, he was one of the early instructors in the company at Camp Campbell. He was the second Louis then. And I told him, Mac, it's too late. We heard it. And I never will forget that. But we just like it. Just I mean, just we're right there together, and here this thing comes in and splats the side of the tank and just drops. You know, just a piece of shrapnel is what it was, you know, from a mortar shell. Yeah. Oh gosh almighty, I can tell you about that darn little town. Oh boy, I got strep throat at that little son of a fucking place. You know, sicker than a dog.
So how long were you off the line when you were sick?
2 days. No medicine. No medicine. Use your own blankets. No bed, no cot, nothing. You're supposed to be ashamed to be sick. Combat. I'm telling you how the instructions of the unit, you know, from old Camp Campbell, the old Cadby and everything, you know, you win this, God, you know, you're to stay healthy and do it. It don't matter about any bugs that you're going to breathe or anything else. At Bitweiler there was I don't know if John mentioned it or not, there was a German prisoner for Americans, you know, and it wasn't really a tight compound or anything, you know. It was just a small compound and had woven wire fence of about 12 feet all around it, you know. And they just a day or two before, they had gotten Red Cross packages, you know, the inmates and that was there. Anyway, it was all gone. Everything was all gone, except for the packages that had been just ripped apart and everything. And the only thing you might get was a pair of gloves or a pair of socks or something like that, if you could find mates or all food values was gone. You know, all the food was all gone out. And it was at this place where we got a test of Hitler's ingenuity. You know, the men that he had, and that, you know, about the size of that that sink back there. You know, in the back of one of these here barns. I'm guiding Ralph Wilson was the driver. I'm guiding him back into a barn, you know, with the tank, so we'd have a direct fire to the east, you know. And it was Ralph Wilson, and Dad-Eye was the gunner there, and I'm guiding him back into there, you know, so we'd have a clear field of fire to the east. And I got Dad-Eye back there to tell me, you know, how far he can go to stop, you know how far, so I can give the same message to Wilson to stop. Well, that's what we did. Dad-Eye told me, you know, he was about 8 inches from the back there, but it was a pile of baled straw, baled hay, what it was. We stopped there, you know, because we didn't want the exhaust, you know, to go back there and set that afire. And anyway, we rested there all night, you know, in this place. This is where I got the Peking ducks, and dry picked them, you know, 2 white ducks. I dry picked them in the helmets, and we were going to have a duck dinner, you know, the platoon, you know, and it don't work. Didn't have any salt or pepper or nothing, you know. Anyway, I got them goddamn ducks cut up,
And first I dry picked them, you know, the feathers and that, and then gutted them, you know, cut the head off the axle of the tank. Two of them. And put them in two different helmets after you cut them up and that, and then water, you know, a little fire, and you know, trying to heat the darn things, you know. Couldn't eat them. Couldn't eat the gas. That was a bit water, yeah. That was a bit water, yeah. And something else that was there, you know, that none of the guys wanted to talk about or think about or say. There was a Woolworth store at this little town on the road going east out, you know, just north of where we had parked the tanks, the 5 tanks, you know, for movement east. Anyway, there wasn't a window broken in that goddamn Woolworth store. Not one window had been broken in that goddamn thing. Dutch could have this day don't remember doing it, and he was in the tank, you know, just to the left of me. You know, I mean, he was a gunner in it. You know, Benson was the commander. And then Dutch could just turn that cannon over there as we were pulling out of the town, you know, a couple of days later. He just pulled that cannon over there to the left and blowed a hole in that Woolworth window with a high explosive shell. Yeah. He said, I didn't do that, George. I didn't do that. And then a couple of days later, Dutch was hit. You know, got his leg broke and everything. You know? Yeah.
Okay, let's get us to,
10:30.
I need to get you to Herleshine.
Herleshine. Well, you know, just prior to Herleshine, we had men go into Bischweiler to get billets, you know, to find out where we was going to stay for a day or two till we got ammunition and fuel and that. And this is where we got our bath too. You know, that hot in the tent. You know, they put a pump in the water. You know, and they pumped it into a tank, and then they filtered it. You know, got it hot, filtered it, and then they run it through the shower unit first. They had 6 shower heads first to run through to take a shower. That was just before we went into Bischweiler, just before the Herleshine thing, in between Christmas and New Year's, you know. And I was picked by the old method of drawing the straw, you know, of who would go on the recon of Herleshine. And I was picked from our company to be the one that would go on the original reconnaissance of Herleshine. And the man that was responsible for the reconnaissance was a Captain McGurk. Huh? Does that ring a bell? Captain McGurk from the 92nd. From the 92nd. I believe he was D Company in the 92nd. But he was the one that was responsible for the recon itself. I was the support. The tank was support in my tank crew. And I was only one tank, too, that went and supported this. Now, this is before the battalion moves into Rohrweiler or into Herleshine or any of it, see, you know. In fact, there wasn't any of us in Rohrweiler yet, although they will say something about the 79th had cleared Rohrweiler, you know, and all this. Anyway, we went on this recon with, and I know that they did not follow his reconnaissance report at Herleshine. I know they didn't. I know that Bromley, I know that Bromley and Phelan screwed the whole thing up. I know they did. I'm that lead thing, you know. We get up and then we get the recon report, you know, of the shed there to the left of the road, you know, to the east of the road, going into the Herleshine, the canal, you know, the Motor River by Rohrweiler and all this, see, and Rohrweiler's to be the battalion CP, you know, it's going to be the medics where Dr. Phibbs is going to be, you know, surgeon on that. And the next, let's see, that was the 6th day of January, and we went on that recount. And the next day then, I was leading the company, nobody else. I was to lead the company across the bridge at Rohrweiler, so we can be across the river over there and make indirect fire over Hurlesheim, so we can fire the cannons over. That would be 18 of us. You know, there's 5 in each platoon and 3 in headquarters going to be along there. You know, this is where that night, the 7th, was where Fred Field come and made himself acquainted with the tank commanders. You know, that night he climbed up on each tank and told who he was. Now then, he had already been appointed the adjutant January the 1st out of the 4th Armored Division, out of Abrams 4th Armored, I believe, 37th Tank Battalion. You know, and he come to us then, and that was where he climbed up on the tanks of A Company and made himself known that he was the new adjutant of the battalion. You know, to us, you know, as far as we're concerned, the new adjutant don't mean junk to us. Heck, fire, he's a darn guy's going to do some book work in that. You know, adjutant's a gosh darn secretary. You know. Anyway, that's where we was at there. And on the 7th, they took the 2nd platoon, you know, after we, let's see, no, we hadn't fired. We stayed there the night of the 7th, and then on the 8th, we did fire, indirect fire, over the north section of Hurlesheim. And the 56th at that time had started moving in to Hurlesheim on that, by that waterworks, what they called Purple Heart Lane, what the 56th come up with, or afterwards. But anyway, after the indirect firing, then the 2nd platoon was pulled to join the 79th Infantry, a unit of the 79th Infantry, farther north, you know, on the drive for Haganoo, you know, and they only used them for indirect firing for just that one day, the evening of the 8th and the morning of the 9th, because on the 9th they was back with us, the 2nd platoon of A Company, yeah, and it was on the 9th that I got hit. See? That was when we made the assault on Hurlesheim, and Phelan, you know, him and that goddamn Bromley, they misread the recon report from McGirt, you know, Captain McGirt, he was the CO of one of the companies in the 92nd, and they misread that information and then we used to make a direct assault. Now, of course, that's where I got hit. That's where Bill Manders got hit out of the C Company. Phelan got hit. And Phelan never did recover from it. He died from those wounds later on, you know, a few years later. You know, at that day, we didn't lose anybody in death. You know, the 9th. You know, Manders got his leg broken badly, and then of course him and I met later at reunions. You know, he was amazed that I knew anything about his recovery, you know, how they recovered him. See, Captain Cook got the Silver Star for getting him and bringing him back. You know, I mean, there's all kinds of stories that go on with this stuff. But here I got hit.
Where were you in location?
I was in the north of Hurlesheim, on the west side of the canal. I was to cross the canal and go to Hall Defilade along the road between Hurlesheim and Rohrweiler. I was to move up there, yeah.
And you hit a lot of opposition then?
Well, it wasn't so much that we had a lot of opposition. We didn't have any, you know, permission, you know, to handle war as we were taught. You know, we didn't have any. The damnable officership just failed us. They just flunked. You know, here I could draw all kinds of maps of the darn thing, and the rest of the division they don't want to accept my version of it. You know, they only want to go back and talk about the 23rd and the 43rd and the 66th and 17th. They don't want to talk about the bad time of the 56th and the 714th on the initial part of it. You know, they wait another 9 days later before they get involved with the god darn thing. It was the leadership. They would not allow Jim Moore. I begged, way out of military discipline, I even asked Mulder to go ahead and fire artillery over Herlisheim there, that northeast side, and knock them cannons out, you know, that were there. Just to knock them out, you know. And they wouldn't let us, you know, the 714th, that 3rd Platoon was there on the north side, wide open. You know, there was nothing there for us to hide behind or with. The only thing that we could possibly do was dip down into the canal and stay there, you know. But we didn't have them crises. We had fords we were supposed to pull out of it, you know. But anyway, they wouldn't let us fire at those cannons, you know. They wouldn't let us fire. Now then, when they fire a cannon at me and I see the darn thing coming at me, you know, and then I get hit, the tank gets hit, and the turret's not clear off, to hell with Phelan, to hell with Bromley. I don't give a damn about them. I got some men here. And I tell the gunner, fire at that gun. You know, we'd already had it lined up. 6 cannons along that railroad going northeast out of Herlisheim, you know, and they was, actually it was Todt cannons, old French 75s. The Germans didn't have a lot of stuff at that time. You know, they didn't have any tanks in there. Oh dear. Oh, and they'll see this on this, and they'll think Moss is all full of bull. Don't know nothing about it. You know, he don't. You know, he had some dreams. You know. But I'm telling you that my gunner hit 4 out of 6 of those cannons that very day there. 2:30 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon on January the 9th, he knocked out 4, even though the 56th was going into Herlisheim. I wanted them goddamn things out of the way, you know. Of course, I got hit, you know. I see the shell coming, I can't do anything. I got hit. Vance's tank next to me, he gets hit 3 times, and you know how the protection on the cannon went right through it into the turret and locked his cannon so that he couldn't raise up and down. He could still turn the turret, you know, but he couldn't raise or lower the cannon. It was locked in that one position where he had fired first. 3 shells hitting there and did that. Yeah. This was Vance with Ralph Wilson was the driver, Gene Wilson was the assistant driver. Dad was the gunner, you know. Vance was the commander, Howard Vance. Yeah, I mean, I know all those men just, you know, I mean, they're all buddy. You know.
When you were hit, what happened when you were hit? I don't have any idea.
Well, Phelan had given me direct orders to move up there to that road, you know, Levy Road, up there on the north side of Herlisheim. But I was not to fire because of the 56th moving into Herlisheim. I was to hold the fire on all of them. See, Lieutenant Smith's radio was out, and Phelan wasn't in direct contact with him. Hell of a time for radios and loud. But anyway, Phelan's in Colonel Phelan's in direct contact with me, and he gave me direct orders, and I told him, you know, give us some support over there, some artillery. Let Mulder, I even usually think, let Mulder throw some shells over there and soften this up and weaken it up for us, and then we can go in, you know. But you can't let me go in there and not fire, you know. And he got huffy with me, and he was going to have me charge of treason, and he's going to have me carried back, and I don't know what all. And I told Hood, you know, in the area here, I don't know what the Germans had planted in there. I don't know what the food was, the food drop, but it was like this, you know. It was a hilly thing, you know, not like our cornfields, much more. more like our sweet potato rolls or something like that, you know, a little heavier. And anyway, I told George Hood, the driver, I said, George, when we get up to this canal, we know we've already studied all this. We know the depth of it. We know the length across it. I want you to drop down into second gear when you hit that canal to go across. When it dips down into that canal, just as soon as you hit that water, then goose it into third. Just shift into third and give it the gas so we can just jump up the other side of that canal. And then we have the fire, you know. Right. Well, when if you drive a tank, there's 18 feet of blind spot out in front of you. You can't see the ground. You can't see out there in front of you. You know, it's impossible. I don't give a darn what kind of periscope you got or anything. You can't, and that's something else. Phelan would not let us button up. He would not let us close the hatches. You know, which is stupid, you know. And here Hood and the assistant driver and I have our hatches open as we go into this bloody mess, you know. And then when I got hit, you know, what it was, you get to the canal, the edge of it, and the tank's to go over, and Hood can't see beyond that 18 feet, and he hesitates. And when he hesitates, we got hit. They had us pinpointed target level, and we got hit. My tank was picked up, and it was shooting out of my head. Anyway, I told Hood then to back up on a zigzag course, you know, because I was bleeding like a stuck hog right away. I hit here, and every time my heart would beat, the blood would just spray all over Montgomery, the gunner, you know. And here I'm hollering at Villalobos, you know, the loader, to get shells into the cannon for Montgomery to fire, and the cases would come. Of course, I'll admit that Villalobos was pretty strong and all that, but the cases, the shell would come right out of the casing, you know, and he'd hand me the shell that it was a dud, and I'd have to throw it out the turret. Now the turret's already knocked off. That's the first thing happened with it. It got knocked off. Out of 9 shells, 4 of them were duds I had to throw out. Yes. Oh, I can tell you some of the sad things that god dang Phelan, you know, with that there 714th, God darn him, that really shouldn't have happened. And we'd have saved that 23rd and 43rd, 66, some terrible embarrassment, you know, 10 days later. You know. Except for that, just that, don't listen to McGirt. What happened to McGirt? McGirt got killed. Yeah. Yeah, McGirt got killed. And I get to visit with the guys in the 92nd, and of course I want to talk about Captain McGirt. You know, I want to find members of that crew and talk to them, you know, to verify for sure, you know, that I was on that recon, you know, January the 6th.
January the 6th. Where were you hit? You said your nose?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, I got hit in the top of the head for one. And here for one here. This one here is about the size of that. You know, and then I got hit through here. This was not removed until 1958, 13 years after. You know, this piece. I lost my teeth, you know. VA wouldn't accept anything, or the Army wouldn't. You know, you know, I got here. Here, let me show you here. I don't know if you want to see it or not. I don't know. It's not a good thing to see, you know, really. I mean, to know. I got 18 holes at one shot. You know, I got 18 holes. And the, I don't know if you want to even take a look at it. Maybe not. But,
Did you got chest wounds?
yeah, across the back of there, yeah. Oh, yeah, hey. I had 2 ribs that were removed, you know, 10 inches of rib that was removed so they could get the shrapnel out of my lung. You know, I mean, there's a hunk of shrapnel that big. It was in this right lung, you know, that they had to get out, you know. and I'm bleeding like a stuck hog, like I said, from the ears, and, from the nose here. They don't know that I'm bleeding in the back, and that was where my problem was. As I'm bleeding in the back, it's internal bleeding, and it fills up the chest cavity. And that about choked me to death. In fact, if the truth is known, they turned in a report that I died of wounds right there. Because I never got a payroll after that. I got two days that I got letters in 1945. I was in the hospital 5 months. They never recognized me any place. I never had to pull a bit of duty ever again. I was always TDY wherever I went, and I had a horrible 1945. I don't know of anybody that, George Winrick, got his chin blowed off. Maybe Norris might have said something there about that, because they was in the same platoon in the company, and he was in the hospital in Cleveland 6 years, to try and get this chin fixed up. George Winrick, still living, he's about 85 now. Yeah, but they, fixed his chin all up and everything. Good friend. I mean, he and I were some of them recruits at Camp Campbell, first days. Yeah.
So they, did somebody come and get you, or did
I had Hood back up, zigzag, and then, like I say, the land is rough. I climbed out onto the back of the tank, and I'm still giving Montgomery orders to fire. And here, Villalobos is pulling the dud shells out and handing them to me, but I'm losing out. I know it, and I tell him that I'm going to, get on the back of the tank here, and you can back with me. Well, I fell off one of them. I fell off the back of the tank, underneath, where the middle of it is going to roll over me, if it don't drag me or something like that. And Dad, like I said, his tank was hit with the 3, where it locked his cannon, He's already back to this creek to the west of it, And Dad sees that this tank is backing into me, So he runs out there and guides me under protection of the tank now, so that the Germans ain't firing at us, but they're going to fire at that tank. He gets me back to that creek too, Dad Francis Dad and he's in bad shape now with cholesterol and all, It's just, he's old age now. He's another one of the little heroes, little Italian fellow that everybody loves.
Now, did John serve under you, John Christmas?
Yes. John joined my platoon there at Camp Barclay. It was about the time that we got assigned to the anti-aircraft. And John, see, he was down there at Fort Bliss, and that's what his was, anti-aircraft. And he's in school, ASTP, and that down there. I think at Texas West then, El Paso West or something. And he thought it was foolish, to have to go out there to Camp Diana on the anti-aircraft firing, because that's what he'd been trained in, Yeah, well, yeah, and was he with me? Yes, he was, yes. Johnny Critches, awful close friend. Awful.
So, did your buddies get you out of there, or did
no, what happened, I don't even know. Maybe Chris has tried to, I don't even know. I'm only told this later, because I'm passing out. First you got your safety belt, the first thing that Ralph Wilson did, he was the driver of Dada's tank, Dada was a gunner, Vance was the commander. Anyway, the first thing he did was get my morphine and sulfanilamide powder. He put the sulfanilamide powder here to try and stop the blood, and he give me the shot of morphine, right away. It didn't do any good, the blood didn't stop or anything. So he gets his own morphine and his own sulfanilamide, and he tries to stop the blood here, just to cake it, to stop the bleeding. But he couldn't do it, and he'd give me his
you know, morphine, and then he give me Vance's morphine, and that I'm in a coma then, you know, and by the time I get back to the medics with fibs, I don't know nothing, and they ask me about how much morphine and all that. I don't know, and they give me more morphine. I get the divisions, the same thing. They give me more morphine. You know, I damn near died just of morphine. You know, yeah, and I'm bleeding. You see, fibs don't even know that I'm bleeding across the back and everything. You know, if you got that many here, this one went through here, broke that arm, and went into the back. So where there was 18 holes, they could only find 16 pieces of shrapnel. You know. And today I got 12 pieces of shrapnel because the darn stuff splits off. You know, the acid of your body eats it apart. You know, and there's 3 in here that I never even knew I had. You know, but it comes off. It comes off of the shrapnel that was in the elbow. Okay? The 3 pieces in the elbow. You know, they left them in there. They left the stuff up and the shoulder and that. They had to try and save my life, and I was a guinea pig with the lung, you know, and that's what they did. They cut out 2 10-inch ribs off this right side. Huh? 20 years it took for them to grow back. They growed back, and I got them ribs. Them doctors told me they would, and I didn't believe it. And every time I'd get an X-ray, you could see them soft ribs, you know, and it was like, you know, like this, you know, yeah, growing back. God,
How long were you in recovery?
well, I got hit January 9th. I got out of the hospitals over there May the 29th. And and that included rehab. That included rehab. Yeah. And then I got to hitchhike all around here. I got to hitchhike up to Bremen. I got to hitchhike through Dusseldorf. I got to go to Wiesbaden, Frankfurt. I got into Paris probably a dozen times. I got over to London as much as I wanted. You know, I was on a perpetual furlough because they had no record on me. It didn't matter what I did or how I did it. They couldn't do it. I didn't know that they didn't have a record on me. I'd go into the embassy in London and get ration cards, you know, and buy candy and then sell it. You know, black market is how I survived on it, you know, and I'd do the same thing in Paris. I'd go in and get a ration card and buy that stuff, you know.
What did you learn about yourself during World War II? Your experiences?
That I'd been a damn fool. I didn't go to school. You know, I lay in the hospitals over there. I lay flat on my back for a long time. This jaw was broke, you know, and I had to drink that pea soup, that British pea soup, for about 3 months. Drank it through a glass straw. And the Red Cross girls would bring me books, you know, and I didn't know what all British books they had, but I'd find out more and more, and they'd bring me more books and stuff to read, and they couldn't understand what the hell is he reading so much for, why, you know, and I'd get their math books, you know, I'd get them and just studying that, you know. And that's what I learned, yeah. I was a damn fool. I needed an education. Yeah. And I didn't get it. Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna stop in a second, but I always ask this question. Our
Okay.
tape's fixing to run out. If you wanted to leave a message to your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, to your friends about World War II or about something about character, what would it be?
I guess it's go back to that old cadre thing, you know, of educating and listening to and being guided by somebody who can give you proper information about any subject, you know. Don't pass anything away. Just accept it all. You know. Accept it all. Oh gosh, I come from a big family, you know, and there's none of us millionaires, you know, none of us. I have a sister in a nursing home now, $3,000 a month, you know, just eating it.
eating him up. You know, all the money they saved and everything was just eating him up. Yeah. Yeah, but just stay in school, get an education. I don't care what subject you want to waste it on or anything. Just get an education. Read more. Read more. Read. I subscribe to the National Geographic for grandchildren for 25 years. You know. My own children, when they got married, when they had kids, I wanted them to have something to study and to read and to learn about. And I thought that was one of the best. I used to take the Smithsonian. I've always taken, a news weekly, for them to have available, always. Always I got something to read. And I got book after book on World War II. I wanted to know if they would want a encyclopedia of World War II. It's 26 volumes. I don't know if the school could use something like that. It's brand new. Some man give it to me to give to. He said, Moss, he says, you'll know what to do with it. And now and then, of course, it's museum time for the 12th. And I could do that. His name was Ludicky. And he's from New Jersey. He also gave us something, I don't know if it ever got into I think it did, the German Air Force uniform and paratrooper jacket and that. Ain't that got that? They got that, huh? See, that was my doing. That, yeah. Got that over there in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. Yeah. Now that was my doing. All that stuff like that.
Well, I hate for us to quit, but our tape's running out.
Well, I'm running out too. I've got a dream. I've got a problem.
Yeah, I was thinking to say, kept you too long. But I appreciate you coming and spending your time and coming late tonight.
Yeah. Well, it's all right. I wanted to do it for my friend John.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.